Episode number 263 of the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. My guest today is Dr. Kelsey Stang. Dr. Stang is a naturopathic physician specializing in reproductive health and fertility. She runs a private practice in Portland, Oregon, as well as an online fertility program, Fertile Future. Her primary focus is bridging the gaps in fertility care to not only include thorough medical workup and treatments targeting the root cause of imbalances, but to also provide comprehensive support for women during their potent transformation into motherhood. Welcome to the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. I'm Michelle, a fertility acupuncturist here to provide you with resources on how to create a wholesome approach to your fertility journey. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Stang.
Thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you. So I'd love for you, first of all, to just introduce yourself and give us a little background on what you do and how you got into the work that you do.
Yeah, great. So yes, I'm a naturopathic doctor and I am also a mom of two growing kids. And my journey to motherhood and really to the work that I do, have been doing for the last 10 years in supporting couples getting pregnant, began when I was having really horrible periods when I was a teenager. And my pediatrician, of course, put me on birth control at the age of 13. And I was also an athlete as a kid and into college. I was an NCAA softball pitcher, and I always really wanted to be top of my game. And I was taught from a very young age to really prepare my body, right? As an athlete, it's like so much preparation goes into how we are going to show up for some big event in our life. I was really motivated at that time in my late teens, early 20s to be really strong and really healthy in my body. And that largely led me to immerse myself in yoga during college. And I went on to become a yoga instructor. And I talk about it as yoga, but it doesn't even feel like yoga, right? Because it was like heated power yoga. It was like I was an athlete coming off of my years of an athlete. It was like it was intense. But I really loved being a part as a yoga instructor of enhancing other people's health and their experience in their bodies, right? Creating mindfulness and attention to the ways that our bodies work. But I really wanted to know more. I wanted a deeper understanding of the body and skills to really incite deeper, more expansive transformation, especially for women and their bodies. So I moved to Portland, Oregon and attended naturopathic medical school here where I live now. And I made the decision then to stop taking birth control. I was having lots of other symptoms at the time, a lot of fatigue. I was having eczema on my hands that wouldn't go away no matter what I tried. And I was having a lot of brain fog, a lot of constipation. I had struggled with migraine headaches, every month, right? We see this so often every month for years. And I was convinced that there was some layer of the birth control that was contributing to challenges that I was having. So I stopped birth control and nothing got better. My periods didn't come back. My fatigue was still present. I was still struggling with eczema. Months went on and nothing really improved. So I decided it was time to figure out what was going on, right? I thought like removing that obstacle would be the ticket, but it wasn't. So I started seeing a naturopathic doctor and acupuncturist who really dove in to the root cause of what was going on, where I thought it was my hormones, right? I wasn't having a period. I was tired. It was all hormone imbalance. It was actually really my gut. So my digestive system was up. I had SIBO, which stands for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which is also a really common side effect, right, of hormonal birth control. So we dove in more of that root cause treatment support, which included things like managing stress, right? I was working part-time, teaching yoga and in medical school full-time, and I had a lot on my plate. We really focused on particular gut treatments, nutrition, and then that wove into really targeting hormone support. And also body work. I saw you recently hosted somebody who does my abdominal therapy, which is also something that I do in my practice.
Awesome. Love it.
Yeah, it's so helpful. Really transformative for me and my health for both both my pregnancies, during pregnancy, and so on. So after, focusing on all those treatment pieces, my periods came back. They were really regular. They weren't painful anymore. They came each month really predictably with ease. My energy improved. My eczema got better. My migraines went away, like just so much, right? Slow transformation of all those things improving. And I felt so healthy in my body and so vital that I got pregnant. And it's like not always the story that we hear, right? Of like trying for so long to get pregnant. Like we weren't actually really trying to get pregnant. My body was just so healthy. And looking back on it, I don't always talk about it as being like, the most empathetic story to tell, right? For people who are trying so hard to get pregnant. But I did the work. Like I spent years really focusing on the root treatment of how I can get my body in healthy balance and my hormones aligned and my nutrient status optimized and all that good stuff. So we got pregnant, and that was like half of the story that I usually tell. The other half is that I did really struggle to get pregnant with our second kid, right? The secondary infertility challenge is something that I think also deserves a good conversation, which is, I was doing all the things. I was working in fertility healthcare. I knew, right? I was like doing everything I could to really bring that second child into our family, and it wasn't working. So I went back and saw my provider, right? Even providers need providers.
Absolutely.
Yes, totally. She really helped me dial back on all the things that I was doing too much of, right? It's how often we see that too, the laundry list of supplements that I was taking and all the pressure I was putting on myself. And she really helped me identify that the main theme that I needed in my life at that time, I had, a toddler and I was working, was I needed to dial back. I needed to just really nourish my body. That was the shift that I needed, was for someone else to tell me, you're doing too much.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a lot of what I do with folks, right? When we're in it, when we're in the process, it's so hard to see what we can be doing differently to change our outcomes. It's so much harder to know what's the best thing to do when we're trying so many different things without really taking the time to observe how it's impacting our health. So I typically talk about, supporting folks in that preconception window, right? Optimizing health, preconception, creating a situation where couples can go into their fertility season, into that time in their life with confidence, rather than feeling like they're doing so much and pushing a boulder uphill. We really want to feel at ease and trusting in our bodies. That's really important to me. And I love so much of the work that you do too, and kind of centering around that holistic component, how we can support our fertility.
No doubt. And it's interesting when you were talking, because you were saying that earlier on, you were focused on your period and other things that were your alarms. And you weren't so much focused on pregnancy, but because you focused on those alarms, that happened sort of just in response. And the same thing happened with me. My alarms were way
Beautiful.
before I was trying to conceive. It was the same thing. I had issues with my period, and that was my alarm. And I think to myself, like, at what point do we pay attention? So that's really the question, because you could say, do we wait until we're trying, or are there other things that can be calling our attention that we might not realize or we might be ignoring? So like, what is it that is going to get our attention to the point where we're going to do something about it and try to uncover what is going on with our bodies? So that was something that I was thinking about. But if you can go back, so obviously we want to know details, like what were the period problems that you had early on specifically?
Yeah, my periods were so heavy. I mean, I was calling my mom every day during my period to pick me up from school because I was bleeding through my clothes,
Oh,
my
wow.
tampon, it was so much blood. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It was a lot. And I was really anemic too, which having low iron can also perpetuate heavier periods. So that's kind of where my pediatrician at the time was like, well, let's just stop this problem, and give the contraceptive, or we were thinking about it as a contraceptive at the time, right? The birth control, the hormones to slow that process down. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you
Yeah.
for that. It's important, because I think when people
Yeah.
hear different things and they can relate to it, and knowing that you have overcome is really helpful, that you were able to figure it out. It's so fascinating how SIBO comes after birth control, and just how many factors really intertwine into what happens in the body. You're giving something to fix a problem, and then that creates a host of other problems, while you're doing it.
Totally. I see, right? I'm sure you see that all the time too. I see it every week. And that's where I'm really so passionate about the like figuring out the inciting issue in the body. Just like you said, like other symptoms, like the hormones weren't even my symptom at the time. It was the other things is like, right, those are the signals. Those are the signs from the body that are like the nudge of like, hey, there's something going on here. There's something that needs a little more attention and a little more support. I totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you say that providers need providers because it's absolutely true. Even if we know a lot about helping other people, it's completely different than looking into ourselves objectively because it's a thing. That's why doctors can't even treat their own family members. It's a real thing.
Oh my God. It's so true. I see kids in my private practice, and whenever my kids have something going on, it's like, oh my God. And like everything is like shit's hitting the fan, right? I need to take them in and have somebody calm me down. It's okay. There's no problems here. It's fine.
Yeah, it's a completely different
Yep.
perspective. So talk about
Totally.
what you've seen as far as gut health, because that is it's something that I'll never get tired of speaking about because I think it's so important to talk about. Plus, it also is so intricate and there's so many different layers to it. And one person's gut problems are different than another's. I mean, there's so many different conditions that you can have. So you had mentioned SIBO, for example, and then sometimes there are other gut problems that are not related to SIBO, although nowadays SIBO seems to be really prevalent.
Really prevalent. And I think it comes to what you mentioned there with like, there's so many different medications. I mean, stress can cause SIBO, right? There's so many different reasons why we can have that imbalance in bacteria. But I also see gut health as such an important factor for fertility and also for longevity and the optimal function of our bodies, right? And the way I usually talk about it is that everything really happens in the gut. You know, it's other than our skin, the only other organ system in our body that's consistently exposed to our outside environment. So it's kind of always under pressure, right, from different things we're exposed to. But it's where so much happens in terms of digesting our food, right? We need to be sure that we're absorbing the nutrients from the foods that we're eating so that our cells then have the energy and the fuel that they need to do their job. If there are imbalances in the gut, it can be such a source of inflammation. And this is something that I see so often, especially in like, my patients or clients going through IVF, right? And there's like this underlying layer of inflammation in their bodies. And so often it has to do with what's going on in their gut. And the way I usually see that manifest is in more like chronic infections, right? Whether it's parasites or bacterial overgrowth or low beneficial bacteria, or of course, leaky gut or intestinal permeability can also cause a lot of just system dysregulation that we see transpire into autoimmune conditions and thyroid issues and just so many different things that can be impacting the fertility process for sure.
Yeah, and I definitely see endometriosis as well having a very, very strong gut imbalance link. And what's interesting too is that a lot of people will just give probiotic to help the gut. But in cases of SIBO, let's explain why that is not. It's important what type of probiotic. Let's put it that way. Like a spore-based probiotic would be ideal, but not all probiotics are the same and they don't always have the same outcome. And they also could be harmful if it's the wrong kind of probiotic.
Totally. I have this conversation all the time of like, you do the work long enough, you start to notice the patterns, right? The diagnostic patterns, like, oh, this really sounds like this thing. We could try this treatment, but we could totally be missing the boat, right? Like we never really know. I really appreciate testing for that reason. I really encourage folks to do stool testing so that we can see what's happening. For that reason, we can target the probiotic to be most effective for their digestive system. And I think what you're kind of suggesting there in terms of particular probiotics that aren't helpful for SIBO, as I understand it, right, is probiotics that also contain prebiotics. So when we have something like the fructose oligosaccharides or inulin, which is a common base, or chicory root is a common like base for a probiotic, in somebody with SIBO, it can cause a lot more gas and bloating and discomfort, right? And then you ask if you ever taken a probiotic and, oh no, they cause symptoms for me. And I don't tolerate them very well, but it really is probably because they haven't been taking the right one, like you said, and it's causing more dysregulation and inflammation. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, and spore-based probiotics specifically are ideal because they have to go through the whole system and then they populate in the large intestine, rather than earlier,
Mhm.
which can cause more
Yeah,
issues. It can just feed the bacteria or
totally.
exacerbate.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I use a lot of spore-based probiotics. But even still, if someone has a lot of dysregulation, they can't even tolerate those sometimes, right? We have to go at like a quarter of a dose and slowly.
Yeah, you have to go super slow.
Hmm. Yeah.
100%. Although even though it's uncomfortable, typically with a spore-based, even the discomfort, it's a little bit more of a productive discomfort. So once you get
Totally.
through that, because it's like it causes a die-off, and that can cause
Yep.
all kinds of issues and discomfort. But what's interesting, as
Yeah.
you were talking about inflammation, a lot of times when they do notice that there is inflammation, they give antibiotics, and then that can cause more issues with the gut health. And it's kind of like this whole
Oh my
spiral.
gosh.
And not that antibiotics are bad, but you could take it with a spore based probiotic to actually help so that you're not impacting your gut. So there's ways to do this, obviously. People like Dr. Kelsey can help.
Yeah. And if the antibiotic doesn't work the first time, that doesn't mean like next time you try it again, right? It's not fixing the root cause of the problem. And
Right.
sometimes I see that it's not a bacterial imbalance, or maybe it's not enough bacteria, or maybe there's so many different other causes, right, within the digestive system that an antibiotic itself can't fix. And so figuring out
Right.
what's happening can be super helpful. Mhm.
And how long have you seen it work? Like, how long have you seen people? Can we talk about fertility health? And I always give like about 3 months to 4 months at least, for changes to last and take effect. But how long have you seen changes take effect for gut health, for people to start to do better with that? Because that also takes a little while to
Mhm.
almost to like rehab the gut in a sense. It takes a little while for things to change, the environment to shift when you're implementing certain diet protocols and supplement protocols, etc.
Yeah, totally. And such a good question, because I think that there needs to be more education around this piece, right? That it isn't just like you often will take an antibiotic and in 2 weeks we'll notice a shift, or even sooner than that, right? Within a week, something like that. But when we're really rebuilding the foundation of how the bacteria are interacting and the intestinal lining, let's say, of the gut, it can take longer. I usually tell folks 3 months. I would say most of the time people start feeling better before that. So they don't always aren't as compliant with the end of the protocol because they're feeling better, right?
Yeah, that's pretty typical.
Yeah, right. The first month for sure, it's really common for folks to feel worse, right? That healing crisis, that we're circulating more inflammatory components, or there's that die off, like you mentioned, and that can cause a lot more symptoms for folks to where they feel like things aren't going in the right direction. And that's where we really have to hold on to the wisdom of the medicine and know, actually, let's push through, see where this takes us. And I find that that's really empowering for women, especially, to not always resort to like there's something wrong with my body, but to really give that confidence of your body knows what it's doing. Your body knows how to find balance, and we're giving it the pieces to support that process that we'll see, if it turns into an improvement. And 9.5 times out of 10, it does really shift things, right?
Oh, absolutely. And just for people who are wondering what we are referring to when we say die off, it's really the bad bacteria or even like candida dying off, because what happens is you recreate an environment that is more hospitable to good bacteria, the kind of bacteria that's actually healthy for your body, healthy for your gut. So when you're creating a different pH, it's not going to be as hospitable to bad bacteria, which is a good thing. However, while that bad bacteria dies off, it leaves with a very bitter flavor in the body, meaning like you're going to have a lot of symptoms. It's not going to leave like quietly.
I love that. No, it's not ready to go. I always tell people bacteria, parasites, they are here. Their whole job is to survive. Like that's all they care about. They're going to do whatever it takes to survive and populate. And so when we're trying to get rid of them, they're sending out all the
They're
alarms.
fighting. For sure, no doubt. So I also wanted to talk about, we spoke in the pre-talk about 5 tips for overachievers. And actually, I think about overachieving. I want to mention that the gut really impacts how we feel. It can impact our stress levels as well. It can impact how we think. It's amazing, but there's this incredible connection between the gut and the brain. So I do feel like it does actually tie into the gut indirectly, but I wanted you to share your tips on for people who are overachievers, which I think are a lot of us. I mean, I'm guilty of it.
Oh yeah. I mean, yes, that's why I'm here, right? Just pushing through all of the hard and really not wanting to make it as hard for other people, right? That's why we're in service to others and the work that we do as well. Yeah, I love that you brought that up in terms of, the gut brain connection, and even to weave in the die off, right? So much of the elements of what might be dying off when you even take a probiotic where you're feeling a little bit off is because they're more neurotoxic. So we start to feel more anxious, or we start to feel depressed or low motivation or having trouble with sleep. And I just love that piece of education, because we think like, oh, if I'm treating my gut, I'm going to have digestive symptoms, but it can be so many different physical symptoms that show up. Yeah, it's really important to understand. And why I love working with, high achievers or more of like the type A people is not only because I resonate with them, but also because there's such a close connection between gut health and hormone balance and inflammation, which are like the three pillars that I really work on with fertility health and people who are, in that category of high achievers. So I want to kind of walk through the 5 things and elaborate on them a little bit. So it's not just going to be bullet points, but we're going to kind of go through the nitty gritty of it. So one of the first things I talk with people about doing is to really become more of an observer of our thought, right? And reframing our thoughts when necessary. And this one will kind of weave into a couple of the other pieces, but I like to plant the seed first, because rather than attaching to, I don't know if you've read the book, The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer.
I love that book. I actually recommend that book too. I probably have mentioned it a couple of times on the podcast itself. I mention it to probably the majority of my patients. It has changed my life. I've listened to the audio, I've read it, I've multiple times. It is just one of those life-changing books.
Yes, totally. I 100% here with you. And I too recommend it to like more than half of my patients, because it's just so helpful, to realize like, oh wait, actually I am not my thoughts. Like this hard feeling, this hard circulating space that I'm in right now of discouragement or confusion isn't me. And I can set those things aside and I can, choose a different path. Right. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of the seeds just to start planting. The other thing I talk about a lot is really isolating support around bedtime. And the term that I use is making bedtime sacred, right?
Ooh, I love that. I love that. So
right. Good. It's this really special time of our day where it's like all the things we want. It's self-care, it's rest, it's restorative, it's time to connect with our partner, it's time to wind down from the day. And golly, I mean, how many people struggle with restful sleep? It's abundant, really abundant, I feel like. And there's so many layers to it. So aspects that help you make your bedtime sacred are no screens in the bed. I usually tell people to either leave their phones like in the bathroom, turn it on airplane mode. I have this like set rule for me that I am never on my phone in my bed, to the point where like I'll stand outside of my bed to set my alarm for the morning, and my husband will be like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "I can't be on my phone in my bed."
I love that.
So those little things, right, make a huge difference. Journaling, putting on some quiet music, keeping the lights down low, making your bedroom a place that is of total nourishment. Especially if we go through the whole day, like doing things for others or having like these really big, expansive job experiences or whatever, your definition of how you are a high achiever is, having that wind down time to get that restful sleep will only make you more effective, right? More productive for your next day. And also just such a tender restorative time for your body.
Oh, yeah.
The next thing that I talk about is inviting in more of an essence of patience and trust, which is really hard. It's a really hard conversation to have. And I've been there. I know that you see this all the time too, just in the urgency, the deep, deep, deep pull and desire for growing a family. And the element of trust is really the one that I like to anchor onto, because patience is also not something that us high achievers really like, right? We want to have what we want to have like tomorrow or yesterday. But I liken it to like when I'm so focused on something, like over focused, right, on reaching a goal. It's kind of like when I'm driving and there's a pothole in front of me and I'm like looking at the pothole. And if I stare at the pothole and say, I'm not gonna drive into that pothole, it's really big, I like inevitably always drive right into the pothole, right? But if I see the pothole and I tell myself, oh, there's a pothole, I'm totally going to miss the pothole. And I keep my vision a little bit further forward and know, like, I trust that my body, like my instincts are going to pull me away from the pothole and all will be well. My husband always jokes about this, like, oh, you were really staring at the pothole that time. Like, right? When we let that fear drive, when we let the like, oh gosh, like, oh, it's so much, then inevitably that's the course that our lives take. Right. But when we step aside and we really trust that our bodies know what they're doing, trust our provider and the support that they're offering us, trust our partner, trust timing, like all of those things can really help. If anything, right, the ultimate goal is that we get what we want here, but also it helps the process feel so much more better.
Oh, yeah, it really does. You know, it's funny because we focus on the goal, but the process is the goal. The process is more important than the goal, but it also achieves the goal.
Exactly. I mean, I've been telling my patients for so many years now that the biggest lesson of parenthood is to surrender, right? No
Mhm,
longer are we in charge of time. Baby needs a nap. No longer are we in charge of our like schedules. Oh, baby's sick. I have to cancel my plans. And the process of preparing for that season, of preparing for parenthood, it's so
mhm.
ripe in that fertility journey as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's like it really, I think it's so often ignored and missed that we are the important part of the goal. We are the foundation. You cannot skip the foundation. Never in any time has a house been built without a foundation. And you can look at it as the house of your own body. I mean, or the reproductive health leaning on that foundation. And so often we just want to go to the end point, but we can't get to the end point. We have to go through
Yeah.
the different steps to get there. And so when we ignore those steps, then they're not going to be able to hold us properly. And then we're just going to spend more time spinning our wheels. So I always try to talk to people about the importance of really bringing that energy back to yourself because you are it.
Mm, I love that so much. I love that analogy of the foundation. Yeah. We're so often we just want to throw the furniture right in
Mhm.
and make it look beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Yeah. The fourth little tip is to really sit down and identify your non-negotiables. And this is speaking again directly to my fellow type A high achievers. Is it exercise? Is it a weekly meeting with a friend? Is it going to your acupuncturist every week or meal prepping every week? Like, what are the things that really fill your cup that also are really supportive for your health? Those are kind of like my parameters. So like it needs to be joyful and it needs to be something that's beneficial for your body, in my opinion. And identifying like 1 to 3, it might just be one thing that is like, there's no way, nothing steps in the way of me, doing this one particular thing for myself. And sometimes there's smaller things like, a 10-minute morning meditation. Oh, I also have time that week to meal prep, like, right? So there's 1 to 3 things that are non-negotiables and that really feel like we're giving back to ourselves. And I'm always in the headspace of I don't have time to add more things. Or what if something creeps into my schedule? I have this meeting, like things came into my day that took away from that time. One of the things that I work a lot with my clients in my program is really looking at our day. Like we do this whole like exercise of like writing out all of the different things from sun up to sundown that we do during the day for a couple of days. And it's incredibly enlightening as to how many minutes we spend distracted, let's say. And that's not to say that we can't rest. I think there's different things, right? When we're distracted, as opposed to intentionally taking space or time or rest time. Those are different, in my opinion. Like researching fertility on fertility forums, like how many rabbit holes we can get swallowed into with researching
Yeah.
online or doom scrolling or, just not doing the things that are really filling us up.
Mhm.
So when we look at the amount of hours and times that we could shift that perspective and maybe add in a non-negotiable to something like that, it inevitably will create this space where we feel more fulfilled, right? We feel more in control, right? We love being in control. We feel more in control of what we're doing. And that includes carving out intentional rest time. So rather than like, I love there's a study a couple years ago, I want to say, that found that watching TV at the end of the day is actually not super restful, right? Especially if we're watching more like, suspenseful things. Our nervous system is triggered. We are not getting rest. Whereas we think like, oh, it's the end of the day, I'm going to go put on a show and, hang out with my partner. Our nervous system doesn't always receive that intentional rest. So I think that sometimes there are other options that we could insert into that time as well. So identifying the non-negotiables of how you want to fill your cup and fuel your body in a really nourishing way. And then the last one is to find support that you really resonate with. I'm sure you see this a lot, just kind of starting the journey with the support that's available and realizing that there's just not the comprehensive component to it that you really are searching for. Or even, it's like when someone's preparing to go find a birth provider, right? Giving birth is like such an intimate and tender time. And it's always so important to me. Like, you need to really connect with this person. They're going to be there, right? It's so important to like really feel nurtured by them, to feel cared by them, to know that they would do anything to support you in the process that you're in. And I think that is something that I see makes such a difference when folks really find that level of care that they're searching for, that is comprehensive and supportive and nurturing for them. And to that same line, how many people we see that come in they've been doing it so long, for years, on their own, right? Trying to put the pieces together, trying to figure out how they can best support their bodies. And so I always tell people, like, this isn't something that we have to do by ourselves. I am a big advocate for shifting into more of a community component when it comes to fertility care or any big transitions that we have in our lives. It's something that our culture has really shifted away from over the last 100 years, right? Of not really relying on or participating in community and asking for help and receiving support. And I think it's something I'm at least really passionate about shifting.
Oh yeah. That's so important that you mention it,
Mhm.
because we're living in a DIY like time.
Yeah,
And not that that's a bad thing. I mean, it definitely comes in handy, literally, like in many
totally.
ways. However, we do need, and I really do feel like it's like I look at like Chinese medicine formulas, and every ingredient makes a difference, and it becomes like almost a symphony, and together is what makes the magic happen. And I feel that
Absolutely.
way with finding the proper ingredient. People, like team members are also really important keys in that formula, versus also knowing who's right and who's not aligned. And I've seen people do a lot better when they choose different doctors. Like if they don't do well, and I'm talking years of going with the same doctor, or like the wrong doctors, and then finding the proper clinic and doctor shifts everything. It's just another consciousness that's way more aligned with that person. And it doesn't matter even necessarily the modality, although it does help to try different ones, but it really does make a difference in the consciousness of the practitioner and how that impacts a person's outcome.
Absolutely. I mean, it's kind of silly, but the amount of times that women have like signed up or like come into my fertility program and then they like find out that they're pregnant before they've even done anything. Like, right? I actually really incorporated any of the change. It's like, oh, well, that level of just like relief, right? Of like, oh,
Mhm.
this is like, I trust this process. Like, we're going to jump in
Yeah.
and things are going to get better from here. And that, just like you said, that like energetic consciousness shift, it's so potent. It's so powerful.
Oh yeah, big time. So, well, this is great because it's such great topics that we're covering, and I love this conversation. I love the fact that you're tying in mindset and really how we see ourselves, our bodies, and how that impacts the way our outcomes turn out, because that is definitely like it's just such a key ingredient, because I think that people don't realize, and I think that science is eventually going to catch up, and it has a little bit, but like people don't realize how important our attention is, and how our attention feeds what, like you were saying about the pothole, like our attention feeds what it focuses on. This is a real thing. I know a lot of Dr. Joe's Dispenza's work focuses on that. He says your energy is your attention is energy, and energy feeds whatever it's focused on. So that aspect of us is just such a key aspect of our power that a lot of people don't realize they even have as a power.
Totally. Yeah. And it's like a superpower, right? We're top of the animal chain for a reason, right? Our minds are really smart, and we can either use it for good and we can use it for benefiting ourselves, or it's so easy, right, to fall into the path of not being benefited by it. Yeah. And I love that your point, like when science will catch up. And I would say that the science is like the derailer, almost like I'm full for modern science, right? But when we really look at like, ancient practices, like the way medicine was practiced for thousands of years before modern science. And I do so much research. I'm full into the science component of everything, because I think there's such a powerful, beautiful blend that can happen when we put it all together, when we understand physically how the body works and how we can heal and manipulate things for good in the body, but also how our body as a living organism is impacted by, like you say, our thoughts or our consciousness or our environment or our relationships. There's so many components that impact also our physical body. It's really, that's a lot of where I spend a lot of my time over analyzing, is how is this physical condition, connected to other things in addition to what's physically changing in the body.
Right, because our perceptions and what we feel and our innate intelligence that really runs our own perceptions in our life sometimes can get pushed aside, and we depend too much on just data. And by doing that, I think you can take from everything. And it's important not to turn away from things that cannot be proven, turn away from things that can be felt, that don't need necessarily to be proven, but have been felt throughout centuries, like throughout history. And that's really what has gotten a lot of societies and civilizations to progress before we had a microscope. So, those are the things that we cannot turn away from and we cannot dismiss, because that's where I remember Dr. Deanna Minnick was on, and she said science can be liberating and it can also be limited. Like we could be liberated by it or limited by it. And I thought that was so true. And of course you need information, but we also have our own innate information, our own innate intelligence, and we cannot dismiss that.
Mm-hmm. Totally. I just wrote an article the other day about that exact thing of how, like, actually what would happen if we listened more deeply to our bodies and what it was trying to tell us. Like I said earlier, right? A symptom is really just a signal of like, hey, we need a little bit more attention here. And like my example with my kids, when my kids have symptoms, it's like the flares are going off. It's not just a signal. And I think we do that a lot with our bodies too. And a lot of it is how we're conditioned as children, how our parents modeled what being healthy was for us. At least that's what I see a lot in my practice. And so much of it comes down to like the inner dialogue, right? When my kids are sick, I'm always like, your body knows what it's going to do, right? You're sick for a reason, and it's going to heal. And you're taking such good care of your body by drinking water, like those, all the ways that we can shift our perspective of this really scary thing. Even though I'm freaking out that they're, vomiting every 15 minutes for 4 hours, it's like, oh, actually, like I'm trusting, right? Coming back to the trust of this is your body doing exactly what it needs to do in this moment. And we can do everything that we can around it to support that process.
No doubt. So love talking to you. This is such a great conversation. I'm just really loving this episode and all the topics that we're covering. And if people are listening and they're intrigued and they want to learn more about you and how to work with you, how can they find you?
Yeah, great question. Website, as it is in this day and age, my digital business card. So my website is just my name, drkelseystang.com. And then I'm also on Instagram, same handle, Dr. Kelsey Stang.
Awesome. I have all of those, by the way, if you guys are driving and you want to look back, I have it in the episode notes so you guys can find it there. So, Dr. Kelsey, this is a great conversation and I'm so happy that you came on today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and diving into all of these good topics. I really appreciate your time and that you host this beautiful podcast to help spread all kinds of support for women. So thank you so much for what you do.
So that concludes today's episode. You can find all of the links mentioned on the episode notes. If you're enjoying these episodes, please take a moment to share and leave a review. Reviews mean everything to podcasters, and I really enjoy hearing from my listeners. You can also find me on my website at www.thewholesomelotus.com or email me at info@thewholesomelotus.com. I love hearing from my listeners. If you're interested and want updates as well as a free ebook on my top 10 fertility boosting habits, you can visit my fertility page on www.thewholesomelotus.com. I thank you so much for listening in and hope that you have a beautiful day.